Hey everybody, welcome to the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast. Week 15 is upon us. It's time for the fantasy playoffs to start in many leagues. Unless you're in the Scott Fishbowl, in which you're already 3 rounds in. FFPC, I think, is already through a round as well. But we had a lot to discuss here. It's a showdown week, elimination game for some teams, virtual elimination team, not quite elimination team. But let's start right off, though, with the Philadelphia Eagles and the Chargers game last night there. Jalen Hurts. Oh my goodness. What are we doing here?
Alarming game, I thought, from Jalen Hurts start to finish. Had some more positive plays in the second half. The really nice throw to Devontae Smith on the 3rd and long to keep that final drive going. But you had the sense early on that the Eagles just didn't have it. I was really curious to see how their first drive specifically would go, and they picked up an early first down. You're like, all right, maybe they're moving it okay. They end up going 6 plays, punts, and it feels like that's how the Eagles start every game. There were some positives. The long Saquon run obviously kind of made his night. Other than that, wasn't getting a whole lot. Finished at 6.1 yards per carry. Thought that was a little bit misleading. Broke 3 or 4 decent runs, but felt like there were also 5 or 6 where he was hit immediately. Thought Jalen Hurts' decision-making on the RPOs was pretty questionable a couple times in the second half, just handing it off to Saquon, like as 2 Chargers defenders are right there. Fantasy-wise, obviously was a disaster for Hurts. Loses 4 points on the interception plus fumble play, ultra rare, ends up with 4 interceptions. I thought one of those was for sure on A.J. Brown. That was just a classic Brian Thomas, alligator arm, I truly gave up on the play, like really just made no effort to catch that ball. And to be fair, was going to take a hard hit over the middle. So Jalen Hurts put him in a bad spot. But Brown still goes 6 for 100. Dallas Goedert got his 8 for 78. Could have and should have been a bigger night for A.J. Brown. Had a semi drop on the first drive, and then on that final drive, probably the best throw of the night from Jalen Hurts, who is struggling to a degree that we really haven't seen. Lays one perfectly over the shoulder in the end zone to A.J. Brown. A nice play by the Chargers defender to get a hand in there. Still the type of play that you're used to A.J. Brown bringing in, and just too many what ifs for the Eagles, who laid another egg.
I caught an A.J. Brown interview after the game, and he kind of owned all 3. And especially the first 2, and then the third one he did. I should have had it, but the defender made a good play. Did credit the defender for that, so too.
That's fair.
But yeah, it should have been a massive game, and the game ends a lot differently, obviously, if they catch that touchdown. And they win. That's how it ends, right then and there. Because I don't think the Chargers are getting 2 scores, including a touchdown, against that Eagles defense that was having Justin Herbert on the run every single play. I mean, the pressure rate was insane in that game. Herbert did miracle work there, especially with the scrambles, especially the RPOs of his own. Insane that he's like running when the play isn't even designed for that, just because he saw something, and he's like, I don't care about my hand. I'm just going to run. You could see he was hurting. You could tell he was favoring it, and yet he still, did that. Said a lot about his toughness in that game.
No question. I thought single-handedly fooled the Eagles defense a couple times on those last 2 drives of the game. I thought Philly played a really good defensive game overall. Giving up 22 points in a spot like that, where they're put in bad spots over and over with these turnovers, and Chargers had a couple decent returns as well. So I think that makes it hurt even worse to lose a game like this, where your defense does show up, because I think the defense rightfully took a lot of heat for how it played last week against the Chicago Bears, but held up pretty well against the run. You had the long catch and run by Vidal early in the game, but after that, the Chargers weren't getting a whole lot in terms of explosive plays. Amari Hampton goes just 13 for 56, Vidal 14 for 44. I think the Chargers trust Kamani Vidal more in pass pro situations. We saw him on the field quite a bit in the second half, because they basically needed like a secondary offensive lineman with how quickly the Eagles were getting through. Herbert was sacked 7 times, probably could have been realistically like 11 or 12. I mean, a couple whiffs by Nakobe Dean specifically, where he's running free, and even on a hobble, Justin Herbert couldn't bring him down. I thought Herbert, the final line, looks like he had a really bad game, 12 of 26, 139 with a pick and a touchdown. He really won them this game by not taking some of those sacks, avoiding the disaster plays that obviously plagued Jalen Hurts throughout this game. But in terms of the usage here, I mean, Amari Hampton, we knew it would be somewhat of a soft introduction. He was outsnapped by Vidal 51 to 23. Carries ended up being relatively even, 14 to 13 in favor of Vidal. But that snap share definitely stuck out to me.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned it earlier. The reason why is that Vidal was used as a blocker a lot.
Yeah.
And I think they want to use Hampton in that capacity. Rookie in that spot. Vidal's been doing that for a while. They kind of trust him to pick up the coverages a little bit better. But I think there'll be other game flows. We'll see against the Chiefs this upcoming week. Let's talk about that. They are a 3.5 point underdog. The Chiefs are favored in this game. Chiefs,
yeah,
keep on getting favored in spot. They were favored on the road at Denver. They were favored over Houston, which I saw them being favored, but not more than they got more than the 3. I don't think they should be favored by 3.5 in this either. I think this is the wrong line. And in this case, I don't think this is a what am I missing thing. I think I see why it is. The Chiefs are fighting for their lives. They're at home. The Chargers played an extra quarter. They'll be on short rest, and they're traveling. They're playing the 1 o'clock window Eastern time. Yeah. I see all these reasons. I still don't think they should be 3.5 point underdog.
I don't either. I know the Chiefs are at home. I know we've said this for like 4 weeks in a row now, but it is backs against the wall time. Chiefs lose this game, it is all over. I think the Chargers winning last night was another just brutal break for Kansas City. They really needed a Chargers loss to have any hope, I think, of displacing them in the wild card race. But I have a really hard time backing the Chiefs here, especially at that number. 2.5, maybe you could see it. I saw really nothing encouraging from Kansas City this past week. I know you're going up against a really good Houston defense, but the kind of self mistakes that have been there over most of the season for Kansas City felt like they were magnified even more. Just bad drops turning into turnovers, poor offensive line play, no explosion in the running game. I don't see any of that changing. I mean, the Chiefs and the Eagles to me are kind of parallel teams right now. You could throw the Ravens in there as well, where you have multiple years worth of data to suggest that, in a spot like this, Patrick Mahomes or Jalen Hurts or Lamar Jackson will come through, but it's just week after week after week now reminding us that that's just not the case. So I don't have a lot of faith right now in Kansas City, but I do understand the line, partially because the Chargers got even more banged up last night. And look, if Jalen Hurts doesn't turn it over 5 times, if he turns it over even 4 times in this game, the Eagles probably win. Right. And, I think that's part of it, because the offensive line issues that plagued the Chargers last night, those are still going to be there against KC.
Yeah, I was going to say, at worst, they tie that game in overtime. That's the thing. You know what? Maybe don't call that play if you know that's at risk, though, too. I mean, that Hurts is going to lock in on one receiver, and that's what happened. So mostly blame Hurts, but I think you still have to blame the OC. You still have to blame the play calling a little bit on that one there too. Chiefs, Chris Jones played awesome in that game against the Texans, but the offense was horrible. Again, Houston had something to do with that. Houston's awesome defensively. They are top 3 defense for me. And I think you see it time and time again, and especially when they're at home. Look out when they're at home. If they can still win the division, getting a home playoff game for this team is really scary. Now, your Jaguars still have the 1-game lead, and we'll get to the Jags in a second. But I think it's definitely a case where I don't want to face the Houston Texans at Reliant Stadium in the traditional Texans invitational window there, or the Saturday at 3:30 p.m. Eastern time in Wild Card weekend. I think this is actually a bad spot for teams. You don't want to be going to there.
I don't want to play in Houston. I don't want to play them at my own stadium. I mean, the Texans have given the elite teams trouble in the past, not to the point of winning these playoff games, but you remember 3 or 4 years ago, weren't they up like 24-0 on the Chiefs? They gave Kansas City a pretty good run even in last year's playoffs, and that was a vastly diminished version of the Houston Texans. They had injuries all over at that time. So I think with none of these teams, feeling like a true power, like Houston is absolutely live. You look at the schedule the rest of the way, they're big home favorites against the Cardinals this week. They'll be even bigger home favorites against the Raiders in week 16. Then you have a huge game that could go a long way toward determining, whether you're in or out, or more likely just playoff positioning against the Chargers in week 17. And that Colts game in week 18, which look huge. We've been circling that for weeks. It might be Phillip Rivers. It might be Riley Leonard. It might be Ripien. It could be Anthony Richardson. Who knows? It won't be Daniel Jones at quarterback. So Houston's schedule, I think, breaks pretty well here. Jacksonville gets the Jets, the Broncos, the Colts, and the Titans. So they kind of get the same thing with the Colts, where that second Colts matchup looks easier. But that Broncos game in week 16, I think that could go a long way toward determining who's the wild card and who's the division winner.
Absolutely. before we finish off with the Chiefs here, just a couple other notes on them. They're down like to their fourth left tackle, basically.
Yeah.
They don't have Trey Smith. We'll see if he plays this upcoming week. Turns out, universe, you made us miss Juwan Taylor somehow. Chiefs fans know about that, but hey, he was beating somebody out for that job. He was clearly considered the guy that was better than the guy who was backing him up. So just think about that when you're looking at there and just how dire the situation is in Kansas City. They're getting nothing downfield anymore. Just nothing. It's all
they have to work
screen.
so hard for everything. Right now. I mean, it's so tough to watch. And look, I actually thought the Chargers did a pretty decent job getting pressure on Jalen Hurts. I thought the Eagles offensive line had a really bad game overall, some untimely penalties, some pressures that just led to dead plays. And like you said, I mean, not only are they potentially without Smith and Taylor, and obviously Josh Simmons is on IR, but Wanya Morris going out like 2 plays in the other night. That was a bad harbinger for the Chiefs, and they're still going to be in that position again. So when you look at Chargers Chiefs, I don't think it's going to be an overly productive fantasy game. I don't feel good about anyone involved in this game. Is it an under spot at 41.5? Is that total low enough?
It might not be. It might not be there. That's just so weird to say that about a Chiefs game, right? You're just like, this used to be the high flying offense. This used to be regular 50-point totals, and now we're talking about maybe getting the low 40s, maybe even cracking on the sub 40 level there every once in a while too, because the Chiefs defense is also really good. And so that's the other aspect of that there.
Yeah, no question. That's why I just don't feel great about this as a fantasy game. It's hard to even trust someone like Rashee Rice, who had some huge drops, looked like he took a hard hit and was maybe dealing with a potential concussion. It's the same week every week for Xavier Worthy, where you get your 4 or 5 targets, not really making big plays. Kelsey was brutal in that Houston game. And, like you said, Kansas City's defense, much like Philly last night, showed up, played well enough to win that game. And, you now have what could continue to be a split for the Chargers backfield. It's like, you don't even feel great necessarily rolling out Amari and Hampton against that KC defense.
No, you don't. You don't at all there. So that's really tough. Let's talk about Jaguars and Colts. We've alluded to both here, so let's hit these guys up both as well. Let's talk on, first of all, what went right. Trevor Lawrence played a hell of a game in a monsoon.
Yeah.
He was hitting throws all game. There was the Tim Patrick throw to me. That was one where it came right after a rare Jacoby Myers drop. It's like 3rd and 16, and he throws his laser down the sideline. I'm like, Jaguars are going to be okay today. They're going to be just fine. And this is after the Daniel Jones injury, obviously, but still, it's like, they're not going to let the Colts back in this one.
No, Jags, punted on their first possession and then immediately had an interception. First play from scrimmage for the Colts was a pick. Jags turned that into a touchdown. They give up a touchdown, but then respond with another score. It's 14-7 already by the end of the first quarter. And I had questions about how both teams would move the ball. Obviously, the Colts were hampered, once Daniel Jones went out, but it was going to be an uphill battle with Jones playing through that injury, going up against one of the 6 or 7 best defenses in football. I'm pretty surprised that the Jags put up 36 in this situation. And I know once Leonard came in, there were some advantage spots. There's Jonathan Taylor fumble around midfield that gave them another score right before the half. But Trevor Lawrence, I think, played one of his 3 or 4 best games in his NFL career, especially when you factor in, how much this game meant. When you factor in the conditions, it was pouring rain virtually from start to finish. 17 of 30, nothing overly special there, but 244 yards, 8.1 yards per attempt, 2 touchdowns. And the biggest thing was no turnovers. There were some really impressive throws. The one that you mentioned to Patrick, there was another one later in the game that really put it on ice, just over the shoulder to Brian Thomas.
Such a good catch.
But Lawrence avoiding mistakes. Like I thought Trevor Lawrence plus big game plus heavy rain could equal 3 or 4 turnovers. And I mean, this was a really, really confident version of Trevor Lawrence. There was a video going around of his interaction, with Liam Cohen after the game. And it's like, man, I remember not that long ago, like that was the Bengals game early in the season when they're barking at each other and you're wondering, man, is this partnership going to work? And Liam Cohen, man, I think he deserves more credit than anybody for this turnaround. Like the Jaguars, I think, had a better roster than maybe we realized because the coaching was so bad, but he has been exactly the upgrade that this team needed coming from Urban Meyer and Doug Peterson.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting in both the case of Liam Cohen and in Ben Johnson, the improvements aren't always with the quarterback. It could be other things as part of the team building as well. Lawrence did finally improve though. But like, for instance, like Ben Johnson, the running game is in the culture, the run blocking has changed a little bit there. In Jacksonville, the defense has been one of the things that, and granted, Cohen doesn't get all the credit for that, but as the head coach, seeing this Jacksonville defense be a wrecking unit that they are, they've had numerous big games this year. Even a game that was supposed to be a shootout, that Chiefs game, the defense won the day in that one there. There's been a number of games like that.
Jags are very quietly up to 5th now in defensive EPA per play. They are 8th in success rate, 5th in EPA per pass, and 10th now in EPA per rush after, shutting down Jonathan Taylor for really the 3rd straight week. So, the schedule has been a part of that to some degree, but they haven't played a complete cupcake schedule by any means. Ironically, some of their worst defensive games have come against like the Raiders and the Texans, right? Not necessarily where you thought those would show up, but I think it kind of started with after that Texans game, they blow a 3-score lead and you're thinking, all right, here we go again. Season's going off the rails, same old Jags. Responding with that just resounding win, 35-6 over the LA Chargers, I think it's been a galvanizing point for this team. And that was their best defensive game of the year still.
Yeah, it was. It really was. And I'm impressed. I'm really impressed. The with and without Devin Lloyd numbers are really remarkable too, by the way. It's amazing to see how much of a difference he's made to this defense.
Yeah. And he was a guy that I think was really frustrating through his first couple of years. He was a great college player and it didn't really look like it was going to work out. He's made a massive leap. Josh Hines-Allen has had a big second half after doing nothing over the first half of the year. And like Trayvon Walker's been in and out. He's been kind of ineffective with these injuries and it hasn't mattered. Foye Oluokun, continues to be one of the most underrated linebackers in the NFL, but I could keep going on and on about the Jags defense. In terms of fantasy takeaways in this game, there's just not a whole lot on the Indy side because the offense, was just thrown off by the Jones injury. Brian Thomas and Jacoby Myers co-led the Jaguars in snaps. They're still the big 2 at wide receiver. There was no Parker Washington, so that's why we saw more Tim Patrick. We got a little bit of De'Ami Brown, a little bit of Austin Trammell. They played kind of negligible snaps. It was really BTJ, Myers, and Tim Patrick as the big 3. 6 targets for Thomas, 9 targets for Jacoby Myers. We said it on the show last week. I'll say it again. Even with Brian Thomas feeling like he's picking up some confidence, if I happen to have both, and I do in a couple leagues, I would start Myers over Thomas.
I ranked him ahead of Thomas as well lately. I've been in the same boat as that. Colts side here. What the takeaways from them. Is there a Colt besides Jonathan Taylor that you'll start this week at Seattle? Would you even consider benching Taylor?
Depending on the league, I think it's justifiable. I wouldn't feel great about it. The chances that you have this other, miracle pivot are not great, but it's possible you could have like a Woody Marks or somebody like that on your roster. We'll see. I don't think it's going to be quite as disastrous as like the Max Brosmer game, but it's a pretty similar situation with, I would say the most likely scenario is Riley Leonard right now making his first career start on the road in Seattle. Obviously, Phillip Rivers is signed to the Colts practice squad. I don't get the sense that he would be out there this week. I guess it's possible. I don't know that I'm thrilled with either of those situations. Phillip Rivers has not played NFL football in 5 years. And again, there's not a worse introductory spot. We've seen this, every time Seattle's played a bad quarterback, they've just cleaned up this year. So I think he's still got to roll Jonathan Taylor out there. He's the guy that carried you to the playoffs. He's the highest rostered player as far as playoff teams in ESPN leagues. But Tyler Warren, I think, becomes a big question mark, which is so tough. I don't know if you could start any of the receivers who are already in kind of dicey territory regardless.
Yeah. So the question on Tyler Warren is like, who can you find as a replacement? Hunter Henry or Tyler Warren? Who you got this week?
Hunter Henry or Tyler Warren? Well, the one way to look at this is if you think Seattle is going to dominate this game, that means that even if it's going poorly, there should be volume at least in that passing game, right? Like it's not a Jonathan Taylor 30 carry type of game. So you could try to look at it as just maybe Riley Leonard sucks, but he throws it 45 times and he completes 22 of those, and maybe Warren gets his. I think I would go Hunter Henry. I think I would, man. It's tough. It's the Seattle defense plus an inexperienced quarterback is just such a bad recipe.
Yeah, it really is. Is that your guy, Isaiah Likely?
I'd go Likely.
Yeah, I would.
I would think about Brendan Strange against the Jets.
Oh, Strange was in my top 10 last week already.
Okay,
and so anybody in the top 10, I think I'm going with. I'm going with Kyle Pitts on Thursday night. Henry to me is like that line. I'm going to have likely ahead of Andrews and likely ahead of Warren, I think, and Henry also, just because this matchup's so tight, and likely's been good 2 weeks in a row.
So I love Hunter Henry. I will say the Bills are, with a bullet, the best defense against tight ends this
except
year.
For last week.
Except for last week. But even with that factored in, they have given up 7.2 fantasy points per game to tight ends. They've given up 37 catches to tight ends all season. League average is closer to like 70. The Bengals have given up 97 receptions to the tight end position. So
not just last week.
As much as I like the Pats offense, as much as I like Hunter Henry, the player, like this is, by the numbers, the worst matchup you could have.
It is. It is. And yet Gesicki went off against them.
Yeah.
That's the thing, that it's hard to square that. But I guess that's just Joe Burrow in the snow doing things there.
Yeah.
God. Yeah.
Ironically enough, by the way, the Seattle defense is bottom 5 against tight ends.
Interesting. But yeah, it just didn't happen against Minnesota because it was Brosmer. So, right. I mean, there's that line where it just becomes such bad quarterback play that it's hard for anyone to overcome that there. All right, we'll move on. We'll talk about some other showdowns. We'll talk about Steelers, Ravens, and what happens with both those teams. But first, Dabble isn't just another DFS app. It's the ultimate social platform where you can connect with other fantasy sports lovers. Dabble lets you win big. You can win up to 5,000 times your money this football season. Starting with Dabble is easy. New users get $25 free when signing up. No deposit necessary. Check out the link in the episode description below to download Dabble now. Thank you, Dabble, for joining us again for this another week of podcasts with us here. Jeff Erickson here with Nick Whalen. We are kind of doing a hybrid look ahead, look behind. The Baltimore Ravens shockingly have lost again. 2 divisional games in a row they lost. They're now 6-7. Likely had a loss. Isaiah Likely, who we will talk about, I think he's a flashpoint for this game, did get a touchdown finally. Got his first touchdown of the year. He should have 3 touchdowns this year. Yeah. He should have had a monster day against the Steelers, had a monster day against the Bengals. We'll probably have another monster day again this week, but man, oh man, they've got so many things going wrong with this team right now.
Ravens look totally lost. Again, they remind me a lot of what's going on with the Eagles right now, where you see flashes, but yet you see who we thought was an elite quarterback just not looking like an elite quarterback more often than not. For the second straight week, I thought Lamar looked better as a runner. He looks better physically, but still just too many, failures on third down. Failures in the red zone are what ultimately crushed the Ravens here. They go 2 of 6 converting red zone trips into touchdowns, and it's been kind of a season-long issue for Baltimore. It feels exacerbated over the last few weeks, but you and I talked about this on XM this morning. Like Derrick Henry was a machine in the red zone last year, the Henry-Lamar combo. That has simply not been the case this time around. He has 6 touchdowns in the red zone. He has one of the highest volumes in terms of red zone carries, but when you look at inside the 10-yard line specifically, Derrick Henry has 32 carries inside the 10. For 30 total yards, less than 1 yard per carry.
Amazing.
Inside the 10. He still has 6 touchdowns in that span. Most of those have come essentially right at the goal line. Amongst like starting running backs or even close to starting running backs this season, that is by far the second worst number. Only Ashton Genty has been worse, and he only has 13 carries in those situations, 13 for 6 yards. So 32 carries for 30 yards for Derrick Henry. And, over and over, again, much like the Eagles, much like the Chiefs, they're forced into these ultra high difficulty, got to have it third down. And then if you fail on that, it's got to have it fourth down. And these plays result in Lamar looking around. He's almost sacked. And then he's moving up in the pocket. Is he going to run? At the last second, he tries to, flip a ball into the perfect spot for Mark Andrews. There's a defender there. You just can't keep living like that. And we've said it all year. The Steelers defense is not good. It is not a good defense. And Baltimore, once again, just coming out flat. I mean, it wasn't the comedy of errors that the Bengals game was, where they actually moved the ball pretty well and just kept turning it over and had these crazy fluky plays. Like they just got punked, I thought, by a Pittsburgh team that all of a sudden is piling up big plays, which they hadn't done in a month and a half.
Yeah, they still came up small in specific moments. The Rashad Bateman drop, for instance, we haven't talked about that. Bateman, just one of the huge disappointments on the year. Just hasn't been able to stay healthy and hasn't produced when he's in there. Drops that 3rd and 4 in the red zone where it may not have been a walk-in touchdown, but it was likely a touchdown at the very least. Kept it as a first down. Just a brutal play. They had to settle for a field goal there. That was when it was 27-19. Settled to make it 27-22. Just things like that. That's the things that they never did last year. They're doing all the time this year.
Yeah, and it's jarring. It's jarring for Lamar to be playing at this level, for Hurts to be playing like he did last night, to see Mahomes fail over and over in these clutch situations. I mean, there are certain things that just kind of feel like givens in the NFL. And, once a quarterback reaches the level that Lamar and Mahomes specifically have, usually they just sustain that. And it's really jarring week to week to see both of these teams struggle like they have. Remaining schedule for the Ravens now, they're at the Bengals this week, home for the Patriots, at the Packers, at the Steelers. It's not easy.
That's rough.
That's really rough. That's a really, really rough schedule. A lot of those games look like they'd be friendlier early in the season. I'm at the point with Baltimore where I don't trust them against anybody. The Bengals might not even have T. Higgins this week. I think that's a likelihood at this point. Second concussion in 3 weeks. They beat the Ravens in Baltimore without him already, and right. I just, there's nothing given anymore with the Ravens. And Derrick Henry to me is somebody that's going to swing a ton of fantasy matchups because, if you survive this bad regular season with Derrick Henry, you made the playoffs. This is the matchup you want. This is the worst defense against running backs. It's the worst defense in modern history, but I still can't get myself to sit there and expect, 17 carries for 125 yards and 2 touchdowns from Derrick Henry because you can't trust anything right now with Baltimore.
No, that's absolutely right. And you don't trust the play. I mean, just look at the first game against the Bengals. He got a touchdown on the first drive. It looked like they were going to score for days in that game. And all of a sudden it fell apart and Henry barely saw the field after the first drive in that one there. It was such an odd game there. You can't count on them to get it right. I think it's baffling. For the first time all season long, the Steelers are now favored to win the AFC North betting wise. They're minus 170 at DraftKings. Ravens are plus 170. Even when the Ravens were 1-5, they were still the betting favorite to win the division. It finally took this to get to that point, in part because now they have a game in hand and a 1 game lead, and they have the far easier schedule. Right. It's not, by the way, the Steelers are not a good team either. Let's not kid ourselves. They're 7-6. They played as good as they can play against the Ravens last week, but you could still see them getting to, they'll probably get to 9-8, but it's not a sure thing. 8-9 might be good enough to win the division.
It's kind of looking that way, to be honest. I hate to say it, but it's not like I have a whole lot more faith in Pittsburgh the rest of the way, right? Like this was a really nice win. This was, given the circumstances, maybe the best game of the year for Aaron Rodgers, but I don't trust this team week to week. They could absolutely lose at home to the Dolphins. I don't think they will, but it's in the realm of possibility. They have to go to Detroit in week 16. Tough matchup against the Browns defense. Note I say the Browns defense, not the Browns offense, in week 17, and then that Ravens game in week 18. So, but neither team has just like this cake path the rest of the way. And neither team right now strikes any fear into me if I'm another one of these teams in the AFC. I don't obviously in every year in the last 5 years, you would not have wanted to face Lamar Jackson and the Ravens in the playoffs unless you're the Chiefs. I just think this is a team that is kind of running out of time to figure it out. Yeah.
Hey, speaking of running out of time to figure it all out, how about the Bengals? Bizarro way to lose against Buffalo, that the pick 6 that when Burrow was dealing all game long, and then a tip pass interception the very next throw too. So back-to-back interceptions, surrounded by just brilliance the rest of the game. Josh Allen, of course, was brilliant, especially at the scrambling, especially on 4th down. He really rose up, but the Bengals had a 2-score lead in the 4th quarter in this game. This much like so many other games this year, it could have been a win. The Jets, Bears, Bills games, those 3. I mean, I know they have to be kicking themselves over this, but the division is there for the taking. Such a down year for the Ravens and the Steelers, and here they are at 4-9 with just a scintilla of a chance of making it.
Yeah, and they could still play spoiler because I think they have a good chance to beat the Ravens, and their schedule is actually pretty friendly the rest of the way, which makes this loss hurt even more. Like we talked about it last week. Like this is the one. This is the one. If you think you can make a run into the postseason, if you think you can catch up to Pittsburgh or Baltimore, like this is the big hurdle that you need to clear. And for like 3.5 quarters, it felt like they were going to clear it, right? And to have the game, flip on such a fluky play, especially when Burrow was having the game that he was. I mean, what a ridiculous effort this was. I thought for Burrow. The 2 interceptions end up kind of marring it, but both of those were fluky plays. In succession too. It's like great catch by the defender, runs it all the way back, then he got a tip ball in the next possession. But it felt like he picked up every key 3rd down when you're just waiting for an opportunity if you're Buffalo to get back into the game. It's like, all right, 3rd and 6, perfect throw from Joe Burrow on an out route. I mean, they were 10 of 12 on 3rd down. They were at 6 yards per play. I just thought this was a really impressive effort, especially given the conditions, right? Like I was not aware that it was going to be like heavy snow the entire game. And the Cincinnati Bengals went into Buffalo and again, for most of that game, looked more comfortable in those conditions.
Yeah, and it's very similar to 2022 in the playoff game at Buffalo, where the Bengals went in and they frankly kicked the Bills' butt in that game. It's one of my favorite Bengals games of all time. I don't have a lot to choose from.
Yeah,
but
I'd love to see that list.
Yeah, but it's top 5 among the Joe Burrow Bengals games, and
no question.
It was very similar. That hey, they like the elements. They play better in the elements sometimes, which is weird against the Bills team that looked like they were finding some ways to struggle. The Bengals defense got frisky a couple of times, got some stops, but then when it mattered, the Allen touchdown scramble was just ludicrous. How he didn't come close to getting touched on that. Yeah. And then the very end of the game, 3rd and 15, they get a sack on 2nd down. They've got a chance to get the ball back down 39-34. Still alive in this game. 1 timeout still left. They get the sack, no timeouts left. Okay, great. All we have to do is get a stop, get Burrow the ball with a minute. Fine. No. Allen breaks contain, gets the 18-yard rush, game over. And there was no contain. That was the problem. You have one job. Don't let him kill you on this play. He killed him on that play.
Yeah. I mean, it's the Bengals defense. It's ultimately what you kind of expected probably deep down. But this goes down as like a reasonable performance by them, despite giving up 39 points. I know, 7 of those were on a pick 6. The Bills also fumbled at like the 0.1 yard line on what should have been another touchdown.
That whole sequence was weird too. There was the touchdown called back. Yeah, but then reviewed to see if it was a fumble, and it was borderline there too. And if it was a fumble, it would have been returned. It would have been Bengals ball fumbled out of bounds at the end zone, but no, it wasn't. So just a weird sequence of plays.
Yeah. So it should have been a slightly bigger day fantasy wise for James Cook. But the Bengals run defense outside of the Josh Allen plays, I thought held up pretty well. Like you and I really thought this could be 22 for 185 type of game for James Cook. And I think the Bengals recognized that. They schemed around it. I think the conditions helped a little bit, but really both quarterbacks were very efficient. I thought, given what they were playing through. Allen, 22 of 28, Burrow, 25 of 36. A classic, unfortunately didn't go your way, but another really fun big game with implications on the week 14 slate.
Bills had 2 4th down touchdowns also, just for the record.
That one to Shakir was just a miracle.
Sick. And then the second touchdown where Allen had like 7 hours to throw the ball to their 3rd tight end. But hey, let's look at it from the Bills' perspective here. They go on the road. They're facing the Pats this week. They're currently projected as the 6th seed in the playoffs. They're not done. They're not their position in the playoffs isn't yet cemented. They're going to be on the road most likely the whole playoff run unless they get a miracle finish, because the Pats could lose this game and still easily win the division. That's the problem, is they've dug themselves enough of a hole.
Yeah.
What are we looking at for this game? Bills Pats.
I think the number one thing is, can Buffalo run on New England? They had very little success doing that in the first matchup in Buffalo. James Cook went 15 for 49 in that game, did not have an explosive run whatsoever, 3.3 yards per carry. Josh Allen was able to get loose a couple of times. He ended up being their leading rusher, but New England's run defense has shown, some holes since then. Like the Jets had some success, running that option early on a few weeks ago. Cincinnati was able to move it okay in that game. Even Singletary was getting loose, although that Giants game just got out of hand so quickly. I don't know if we could take a lot from that, but I still think that's what Buffalo wants to lean on, because these pass catchers continue to be mostly unreliable, even in what should be better matchups for them. Bills are road favorites. I think there is still the idea of, New England's won all these games in a row, but look at the schedule. We didn't expect them to be this good. Can they really beat Buffalo twice in the same season? This game means a lot for New England as far as trying to hold on to the 1 or the 2 seed in the AFC, having to battle the Broncos for that. But it still means more to Buffalo, right? Especially trying to avenge that early season loss. So the number one thing I'm watching there is how effectively can the Bills run the ball on that Patriots team. And, with a big jump up in class now for New England, can they do it again? Can they translate the success they've had the last few weeks over the Giants, the Bengals, and the Jets to now a much tougher opponent?
Yeah. I think the same thing can be asked out of the Bills though, too. Bills have, beaten the Steelers and the Bengals the last 2
that's
weeks.
true. And they've needed some crazy plays to do it.
Yeah, and before that, they got thumped on the road by Houston. Now, Houston, I think, is a better defense than New England, but New England's got a far better offense. So every time Buffalo's gone on the road this year, I felt a little queasy about them too. So I like New England getting points here. I'll probably go with the home dog on this one here. I think there's a lot of disrespect for a team that is the number 1 seed in the AFC right now.
But I've come around on the Pats. I think there's something to be said, even though the schedule is historically easy, to not get tripped up at any point during this run has been really impressive.
Indeed it is. So I'm really looking forward to this game, though. One of a couple of big showdown games. We got another big one is Green Bay and Denver. I want to talk Green Bay next, but first, share a little note from you from our good friends over at Prosper Trading. Every weekend, millions bet on sports, hoping to beat the odds. But here's the truth. The house always wins. With trading, you're not betting, you're building. At Prosper Trading Academy, we give you the tools, the education, and the live guidance to actually create an edge. You can control your risk, compound your wins, and trade alongside real pros every single day. Stop gambling on games you can't control. Start trading the markets you can. Visit prospertrading.com/roto today. That's prospertrading.com/ROTO and take your shot at real financial growth. Thanks to Prosper Trading for their sponsorship of this podcast. Jeff Erickson here with Nick Whalen. The NFC North had a lot of definition this past weekend. The Packers and Bears had a great showdown. The Lions kept their season alive. Yep. Let's start off in Green Bay, and then we'll get to the Lions as well. But, hey, this Packers-Bears game lived up to billing. I think two things are true. I think the Packers showed that they are the elite team in the division, but the Bears also showed that they belong.
Yeah, no question. I'm usually not a fan of the moral victory trope, but I thought even in a loss, this was 2 weeks in a row now that Chicago, I think, has shown me, has shown us, has shown everyone that, this is not entirely a schedule-based, opposing quarterback-based run that they've been on. Really impressive win, still over Philly. Even after the version of the Eagles that we saw last night, I still think that's a great win going on the road and dominating that game like they did.
Yep.
And then, after falling behind early, Green Bay's hitting some big plays, to rally back to this game, to give yourself an opportunity to win it on the road. And then, tough way to go out with Caleb Williams just wildly underthrowing and throwing late to Cole Kmet. This was a pretty evenly played game. And, I think it got a little dicey for Green Bay in the second half because they kind of started falling into some of those old patterns of, couple 3 and outs. All of a sudden you're giving up a 10-play, 5.5-minute drive. You're giving up a 7-play drive, a 17-play touchdown drive to begin the fourth quarter. I mean, the Bears ripped off 8.5 minutes on that touchdown drive that made it 21-21. That's how Green Bay has lost over and over this season, is because opposing teams are picking up third down conversions. They're running the ball well. All of a sudden you look up and it's like, oh no, we have like one more possession in this game. And I mean, Green Bay was able to do what they weren't against Cleveland, against Carolina, against Philly, and bounce back. Once it was 21-21, they put together an 8-play touchdown drive. And I thought maybe the key play of the game, Jeff, was a 3rd and 2. It was at the Bears, 30-yard line, where they ran like a pitch play to Josh Jacobs. It looked like it was going to be totally blown up. There's 2 Bears defenders right there. Jacobs makes his best cut of the year, turns it into a 7-yard gain, extends the drive, and the Packers go on to score on that drive. So,
yep.
I think Green Bay had the perfect mix overall of aggression early on and then leaning on the run in the second half. I think they probably wish they would have been a little more aggressive in the second, but if I'm the Bears, I don't come away from this game panicking by any means. I like to see a little bit better out of Caleb Williams. When they started moving him around, they had the highest play action rate that any team has had this season, one of the highest in the last decade, especially in the second half. That's when we started to see Caleb Williams cook. He did get off to a very rough start. He was 0 of 6 to begin this game passing.
Right. That's right. The whole first half was a disaster, settling for the field goal right before halftime. Think, okay, well, fine. At least we got a score out of it there. And the Packers took 3 plays to score. They had the bad kickoff by Cairo Santos. I think that's one thing about the Bears, by the way. I have such distrust in Santos that coming down in some close games, that they get to a playoff game, it's going to be ghosts of Bears playoff past, I think, if it comes down to Santos. That's one thing I am worried about a little bit. Even the game deciding play at the end there, the Kmet target, same play that they ran against Philly for a touchdown. It was there. I think if he throws it sooner, he throws it with maybe a little bit a little bit more distance. There's ways for that to have worked. I love the play call. It worked, but I also thought that Nixon made a good play on it. Good adjustment, get his hands on it the last second. They clearly saw that film. It wasn't like they're completely ready for it, but they're ready enough for it there. And the thing I like about the Bears is they're resilient. They shouldn't be digging themselves into these holes, but they don't quit. Like last year, this is a blowout. This is the Chargers win. I mean, not the Chargers. The Packers win by 3 scores. If this is last year, but the Bears rally back. They dominated that second half. They just didn't leave themselves enough time. They got themselves in a do or die situation. That 4th and 1. I don't mind taking the shot on 4th and 1. By the way, I thought that was with the amount of time left on the clock. You kind of needed this, and you needed a touchdown anyhow. I didn't mind that. Do you think they go for 2 if they get that touchdown?
No question. I think they were running off a lot of time to the point where, let's say they had picked up a first down instead of throwing that interception. Like it would have gotten a little bit dicey because I think they were more worried about Green Bay, getting the ball at the 40-yard line and kicking a game-winning field goal. I think they would have gone for it. And look, I was watching the game with some Packers fan friends. They did not want that. I think especially a team that's coached by Ben Johnson, you just know they have a play. It's probably not going to be a double reverse, throw the ball sideways, Cleveland Browns 2-point conversion. Like, Ben Johnson has a specific play ready for that situation. So the Packers are relieved that it didn't come to that. Those are always a coin flip, but the way the Bears were playing at that point, you kind of felt like they were going to get it if they punched it in. So not a whole lot to say fantasy wise here. Christian Watson, even on low target volume, caught all 4 of his targets for 89 yards and 2 touchdowns. Of course, it was cornerback Bo Melton on the long touchdown just before half. Jaden Reed was back in the mix. He goes 4 for 31 on 4 targets. In the running game, they rode Josh Jacobs, as we expected, 20 carries for 86 yards and the touchdown. And then once again, a pretty even split between DeAndre Swift and Kyle Monungai, 13 and 14 carries respectively.
Yeah. The only pass catcher I feel comfortable starting for the Packers is Watson. Reed is kind of a break glass in case of an emergency. If you have some injuries or something of that nature, then I go ahead and start him because he actually gets some runs too, which help. But everybody, it's such a spread around offense. Otherwise, kind of like the Pats in that way too. Bears side, Noah Dunze in this game. Luther Burton had some good moments out there, but the passing game was a little frustrating as a whole for the Bears. DJ Moore, just a disaster fantasy day. I don't see how you can start him, but the problem is he'll have those games where he's great and you're like, but then it's like 50-50 starter disaster. And this one was on the disaster side of things.
It feels like it's been more like 80-20, honestly, this year, as far as DJ Moore goes. So you just you're not going to feel comfortable with it really in any matchup, even against some of the softer defenses they played, of which there have been many. He's mostly disappointed. So not somebody I'd be looking to start this week unless I have to. Bears, they're home for the Browns, who had a terrible defensive game against Tennessee, but a lot of that was just, letting up big plays on the ground. Like snap to snap, they were still fine. Bears are 7.5-point home favorites. I think this is a game where they do probably go run heavy, test that Cleveland run defense again, and just try to win this game on defense. I mean, it's still a very turnover prone quarterback going up against the best turnover defense in the NFL. Yeah.
Caleb Williams versus Myles Garrett is not a matchup I'm enjoying if I'm a Bears fan. That's for sure. If I have Caleb in fantasy, I'll have to decide if I do make the playoffs in the NFC. I have to kind of sort through that a little bit, but I have a Hurts versus Caleb Williams decision this week. And I'm probably going to start Hurts like I usually do, but it's not a good spot to be in. That's for sure. We're talking about teams that didn't rise up to the challenge, the Chiefs and the Ravens, when trying to save their season. One team that did do so was the Detroit Lions. Playing on Thursday night, big win over the Cowboys. Jahmyr Gibbs sealed it off, but all along this offense was clicking despite a hobbled Amon-Ra St. Brown. Huge performance by the Lions in a season. They absolutely needed it. I still don't really think that they've got everything right, but this was necessary, but not sufficient. They have to keep rolling. They get a tough game against the Rams this week. They're probably not going to win the division, but they could still sneak in as the wild card.
Yeah, and I think they ultimately will. I think this was kind of an inflection point game for the Lions. Felt like a coin flip, at least to me, going in. And as somebody who was on the Cowboys, I knew like 10 minutes into the game that was the wrong side because Dallas came out really, really flat, especially defensively, just looked slow I thought the entire night they weren't getting after Jared Goff, as much as I expected. He took only 1 sack on the day. We talked so much about this banged up offensive line. Just didn't matter. I thought the Lions played this game like their season was on the line. Dallas played it like it was just a random week 4. Yeah, we could win it, we could lose it type of game. Just mental mistakes all over the place, fumbles, penalties, guys not running the right route. Like it was super sloppy. I thought Dak was pretty bad for the most part. Ended up putting up 376 yards, but a lot of that was just you had to match scores with Detroit. They really didn't run the ball all that effectively. Thought Dak made a lot of really questionable plays in the first half, and then CeeDee Lamb going out when he has 6 for 121. That felt like the final nail in the coffin. But realistically, it was just their inability to get stops. There were plenty of times in this game where it's like, all right, Dallas has scored again. If they can force a 3 and out here, this might be the time. And it never felt like that was going to be realistic.
No, this is and absolutely every time you thought like, they get the big play, big PI call for Pickens, and nope, we get Ferguson with the hands to the face call. Yep. Ferguson with the fumble. Dak had that horrible backwards throw thing that was ruled a fumble, and play was stopped. And I don't think Ferguson was getting it more than 2 more yards anyhow, but still, that killed another drive. It's just time after time they kept
every time they hit a big play or had some momentum, there was immediately either a negative play or a penalty that killed it. And settling for field goals over and over in the first half, that was tough to watch. Again, this Detroit defense is exploitable, and I thought Dallas played a really, really poor game overall. But again, the defense is the issue here. You can't allow 44 points and say you should have won that game.
Agreed. 100% agreed. Lions still aren't in the playoffs, by the way. They're 8-5, but they're the 8 seed right now in the NFC. So between San Francisco and Chicago, or, God forbid Philly, but I don't think it's going to be Philly, but between San Francisco and Chicago, who do the Lions pass to get into the playoffs?
Well, to me, it's probably Chicago. I think that's the most realistic path because
they get the head-to-head.
Right. Like even if the Eagles were to somehow fall out, obviously Dallas would slide in there as the division champ. So like, that's not even a realistic option necessarily. 49ers rest of the season, they play the Titans this week, the possibly Phillip Rivers Colts in week 16, then the Bears and the Seahawks. And that Seahawks game could be meaningful. We'll see how the NFC West shakes out at the top. Will likely be meaningful. So it's 2 easy games and then 2 tougher games. But I think Detroit, in a lot of ways, is kind of in position to control their own destiny. The problem is you're at the Rams this week, and this feels like a gotta have it, especially with the Bears playing the Browns, a game you would expect them to win. They of course do play at Chicago in week 18. They play the Steelers and the Vikings before that. Those are 2 games they should win. So I say on one hand that they somewhat control their own destiny. They really don't. They need help from Chicago. They can only take 1 game off of the Bears straight up. So they need the Bears probably for sure to lose either the Green Bay or the San Francisco game, possibly both, and then of course beat them in week 18.
Yeah, and I'm looking at like conference win percentage right now. Like the Lions are 5-4 in conference. The Bears are 6-3 in conference. So they definitely need help, for tiebreaker purposes too, which is interesting as far as that goes. It's really, wild to see that, we're looking at those spots. And I wouldn't think that Minnesota game, Minnesota defense is still legit, and they actually went into Detroit and beat them. That's the game that Detroit really, really wants to have back. That's the one they just really was inexcusable for them.
Yeah, I still think the Lions are in an okay spot here, all things considered. Like, let's say they lose to the Rams and the Bears beat the Browns this week. So you're 2 games back of Chicago with 3 left. The Bears play, again, the Packers, the Niners, and the Lions. So if you assume that you beat the Bears and you have the tiebreaker, let's lop 1 game off there. You need to win out. And even if the Bears go 1-1, you would then still have the tiebreaker.
I think so. Well, they have that. If they beat the Bears, then they'll have won both games against them.
Exactly.
So I think that's it. But both teams are 1-3 in division too. By the way, they both, the Lions have already been swept by the Packers. That's a bad one there for them too. That's not even close in those 2 games either. So that's also noteworthy there too. All right. Let's move on a little bit here. We got a couple other games I wanted to talk about before we get out of here, including the Tampa Bay Bucs finding a way to lose at home to the Saints, also in a rainstorm, similar to Jacksonville. It's just total rainstorm there, but I'm not even surprised at that. It's a divisional game. They've had some close, some close. It's a rivalry. It goes back, but the Bucs have been a slump for about a month and a half now. this is the sort of thing that's probably coming, that they probably, they've been getting away with it at other instances or getting beat by good teams. They finally got beat by a team that's not a good team, in part because they're still not firing well. They're, Baker's playing hurt, and I think it shows. His accuracy is way off right now.
Yeah, we're a long way removed now from Baker Mayfield MVP talk, and the injuries to him and to the receivers, have certainly been a part of it. The O-line has been banged up this year, so there are things you could point to, but he's just not playing at the same level. Like, we can also levy some criticism on Baker Mayfield, who was not very good in this game. Should have had a touchdown to Emeka Egbuka that went off of Ibuka's hands. The throw was a little hot. It was a little high in the rain, but still one that I'm sure Egbuka would say he should bring in. So that was a game changer, but really, I thought Tampa Bay lost this game on fourth down specifically, and on third down for putting themselves in those fourth down situations. But they were stuffed on like fourth and three or shorter, I think 5 times in this game, 3 in a row at one point, as far as getting stuffed on running plays on a 4th and 1. Like, the Saints defense kind of bucked up when it needed to. They tried throwing in those situations later in the game, didn't really have any more success. They had a chance at the end after forcing a punt. Saints picked up kind of a miracle third down, and you felt like they might have a chance to run it down. They end up getting a stop, got the ball back with just under 2 minutes left, and they had a 4th and 4 deep in their own territory, and Baker Mayfield just throws short to Cade Otton, and they ruled it a catch. It was questionable, but it was short of the sticks on 4th and 4. And it's like, that was just kind of the day it was for Tampa Bay. Like, you're so used to Baker and the Buccaneers, especially against a team like the Saints at home, finding a way to rally back and pull out a win at the last second. And the way the game was trending, like, even as somebody who wanted the Saints to win that game, I was like, I think usually I'm negative in these situations. Like, I think the Saints are going to get a stop. Like, it didn't feel like the Bucs magic was there at any point.
Yeah, agreed. I totally agree there. We got to mention Tyler Shuck played okay. And he's dealing with these same conditions. You and I have both been critical of the draft pick of Shuck. I think the decision to turn to him as the starter was the right one, to at least see what they've got in him. Is he good? Is he good enough to avoid spending a first-round pick on a quarterback next year if you're the Saints?
Probably not, in my opinion. Tyler Shuck went 13 of 20 for 144 yards and a pick in this game. He did have 2 rushing touchdowns, 7 for 55 on the ground. Part of it depends, I guess. You spent a high second-round pick on him, so like, is there some internal obligation to see that through because of the draft capital? Maybe. But ultimately the Saints are one of those teams, one of many teams that are in competition for the number 1 pick. And that there's still a lot to be decided there. A ton of teams sitting at 2 or 3 wins. So they'll be in the mix. I think, let's say the Saints get the number 1 overall pick, and Fernando Mendoza leads Indiana to a national championship and he goes on a crazy run. Like, I think it's going to be really hard for them to pass on an opportunity like that. So it's possible, depending on how the draft order breaks and how we feel about the quarterbacks come April, that maybe they pass. But I don't think they would pass on an opportunity to draft a big time prospect because they have Tyler Shuck.
Agreed. Now the question is, does said big time prospect exist? And
that's the thing. Yeah, maybe not.
Yeah, there are 8 teams, by the way, with 3 or fewer wins. So it's a big muddle, and some of them will end up playing each other. I think we still have a Giants-Washington game, for instance. That'll be a little bit of a draft pick showdown. Yeah, we got it this week. That's right. So that'll be interesting. Arizona is there. New Orleans is there. On the AFC side of things, the Titans have 2 wins. The Raiders have 2 wins. The Browns and the Jets have 3 wins. That Jets win over the Browns could be important. Wild. They may have cost themselves.
The Browns could be important.
The Raiders having beaten the Titans could end up being important.
And the Patriots.
That's the most aberrant result of the season right there. But
there have been plenty. It feels like every week now we're getting like a 8.5 to 14 point upset. But yeah, I mean, week 1 is always a little wacky, right? Like the Raiders had real expectations at that time. It's like, wow, what a good win. Raiders might win 8 or 9 games. But yeah, that's one that'll be an all-time silly result.
It really will. Kind of like Raiders beating the Ravens last year in week 2 at Baltimore. Very similar to that. All right, Nick, it's time to empty the notebook for the games that we didn't cover. And, we got a few of them on the docket there. Rams and Cardinals. Let's start off there. What do you have to take away from that game?
The poor Cardinals, man. Jacoby Brissett every single week in garbage time ends up somehow salvaging like an 18 to 25 point fantasy week. He is, I believe, QB 3 or 4 since taking over as a starter. He is doing that almost entirely on volume. He once again threw the ball 40 plus times. in this game. It was never close. It was very clear, like midway through the second quarter, that Arizona had no hope to cover this game. Michael Wilson is your wide receiver one over the last 4 weeks. He goes 11 for 142 and 2 touchdowns, almost like dead even usage between Bam Knight and Michael Carter. We'll see if DeMercado or Trey Benson, comes off IR. It kind of seems unlikely at this point. We might even have news on that because I think today was the deadline that they need to activate him. Still up in the air as of right now, but I think we're going forth with Knight and Carter as kind of this sad twosome backfield the rest of the way. Devontae Adams did not catch a touchdown in this game, which is pretty surprising when the Rams put up 45 points. Blake Corum, I thought, once again, kind of ran it better than Kyron Williams. Both of those guys got theirs, but 12 for 128, 2 touchdowns for Corum. Saw a lot of work in the second half. And this ended up being the best of many very good offensive days this season for the Rams. 7.9 yards per play, 530 yards of total offense.
Yeah. They were just rolling. There's a 2-play sequence. Very simple. Landsman gets the interception off of Brissett. Yep. Really nice play. Disguised himself well in coverage, made an athletic play to get the interception. Next play, Puka Nacua touchdown. The game was already over at that point in time, but it was just so representative of how that game was going there. Really impressive with that all the way around by the Rams. Good bounce back after the stunning loss at Carolina. We're a week away from the showdown against the Seahawks. Rams, they get the Lions and then the Seahawks back-to-back weeks. Meanwhile, the Seahawks, they get it a little bit on easy street. They go to Atlanta this past week. They get the Colts without Daniel Jones this week. It's a shame that this isn't much of a showdown this week there because it was shaping up to be a fun game. Instead, we'll get to see probably a squash, just like we saw, although it took a half for them to get going against the Falcons.
Yeah, it was 6-6 at the half. They outscored Atlanta 31-3 in the second half. Started the second half with a 100-yard kickoff return by Rashid Shaheed. So that's when things really started to slip away from the Falcons. I thought played a really good defensive first half at least. Mm-hmm. And Bijan Robinson ended up fumbling on the ensuing drive. So Seattle goes kick return, touchdown, field goal, touchdown, and then just a run the clock out punt with their second half possessions. Not a whole lot here. I mean, it was a nice bounce back for JSN, after his easily worst game of the season last week. And this game, the way it was going, as Seattle started to pull away, you kind of wondered like, will they pull back his usage? Tacked on a second touchdown in the second half. So he goes 7 for 92 and 2 scores. Cooper Kupp got in the end zone. Not a whole lot for the backs in this game. I mean, Atlanta obviously did not score a touchdown. Bijan carried it 20 times. He was targeted only twice out of the backfield, 2 catches for 8 yards. So overall volume was fine, but going up against Seattle, you're just not going to have a lot of success there. Falcons now play on Thursday night against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers on the road in Tampa. And then, like you said, just another one of those spots. And there have been a few for Seattle this year where it's like, amazing defense that crushes bad quarterbacks going up against likely Riley Leonard making his starting debut.
Right. With Phillip Rivers being the backup or maybe just a practice squad guy giving guidance. But point is, it's grim. It's very grim on that one there. No Drake London in practice on Monday. We probably don't see him again for the Thursday night game against the Bucs. We might see Mike Evans. I think today and tomorrow's practices will help determine that one there to see if we get him back and what version do we get back as well. So that we'll see about that. But all right. Gonna do it. Browns Titans. I know it's hurtful for you. I'm with you. I did the rewatch on that game. There were so weird game all the way around. Shedeur puts up this huge fantasy game, but if you watch the game, there were a lot of moments where it wasn't so great for him or for the Cleveland offense. Yeah, they just had these moments of brilliance, which they didn't have with Dylan Gabriel, mind you. So I think they made the right decision to start him the rest of the season, but still, it's still pretty tough watching the Browns.
Yeah, I knew what I was walking into. I lost a very important survivor entry on the Browns. And look, if you had told me they put up 412 yards of offense, Shedeur has like a 35-point fantasy day. They hold Tennessee under 300 yards. It's 6.4 yards per play to 4.6. I would have said, the Browns, wow, what a day. The Browns probably blew out the Titans at home. And it was a couple long runs by Tony Pollard that kind of set this game off right away, and you just kind of knew it was getting away from Cleveland. Credit to the Browns though, they did respond. They put up a long touchdown of their own, Shedeur to Jerry Jeudy before the half to make this a 17-14 game in favor of the Browns. They were leading at halftime. Here are the Browns drives coming out of the half: punt, 3-and-out punt, 3-and-out punt, interception on a horrific decision, terrible throw by Shedeur, 3-and-out punt, fumble on the first play of the drive, deep in their own territory, and then they had a punt blocked, and suddenly it's 31-17 Titans. Cleveland, of course, somehow rallies, back-to-back touchdowns on their final 2 drives. They come up with 2 big stops. For some reason, Jeff, they went for 2 on the first touchdown. I get it. I don't need to be barked at. It's the analytics play, whatever. My retort to that would be, you're the Cleveland Browns. The chances of you converting a 2-point conversion are significantly lower than maybe any other team in the NFL. So the math doesn't really math to me on that one. And then, of course, after missing the first 2 points, they get a miracle touchdown to Harold Fannin. Great throw, great catch. Got to have a 2-point conversion to force overtime. They take Shedeur Sanders off the field. They direct snap it to Quinshon Judkins, who I think just missed the handoff. It was supposed to be like kind of a double reverse. And then
I think
maybe
he forgot. Well, I really think he forgot to flip it to him.
I think so too. Either that or he mistimed it and the receiver kind of passed him up, because you could see him turn around and then he panics and just like throws the ball up in the air. It's just a classic Cleveland Browns play, and the Titans escape with a win.
And then he throws it later, and you're just like, it was almost like you've already missed your homework assignment, and then you try to turn it in.
Yeah. Well, it was dead at that point. And just such a horrible way to lose a survivor. I will say, the Jags were the team I was going to pivot to, and easy to say in hindsight, would have been an easy win. I was considering the Eagles as well, kind of playing into the Herbert narrative with the bruised hand. Like it might have somehow been worse to lose the way the Eagles lost last night than this Cleveland game.
Yeah, I think it would. I think it probably would have been, because then you have the expectation of this really good team, and the way they looked so bad in doing that. Yeah. Well,
specifically to lose on like a walk-off interception, after you're gifted that 4th down conversion on Owe jumping off sides, you get that miracle 3rd and 16. It's like you're all the way in the red zone. It's like finally the Eagles are going to convert one of these, and then Hurts turns it over for the 5th time. I don't know. Either it's all hypothetical. Both would have been horrible ways to go out in Survivor.
Yeah, I think so too. Let's finally, we got a couple of games we didn't touch at all. Minnesota, Washington, which I don't think we really need to go that deep into. No. I'll just say, don't really grade JJ McCarthy based off of this, because he still didn't get Jefferson unlocked. Washington's terrible defensively, but they do face Dallas this week on Sunday night.
They do. I mean, if there was ever a spot where you could be like remotely confident that Justin Jefferson could get something going, maybe it's against that Dallas team. But to me, this was more about the Commanders just not having it from the jump. McCarthy was fine, 16 of 23, did have 3 touchdowns. All 3 of those ended up to tight ends, 1 to Hawkinson, 2 to the backup tight end, Josh Oliver. It's a nice confidence booster for sure for McCarthy. Vikings are the first team in like 20 plus years to get shut out and then shut out a team the next week. The highlight for me was we had, I think, the longest drive of the season to begin the second quarter by Minnesota, a 19-play, 98-yard drive that took over 12 minutes off the clock.
Yeah. Wild. And the whole game featured that too, by the way. They ended the game with a 7-minute, 50-second drive just to run out the clock. Ended on time. It didn't, just ended. Game ended. Yeah. Drive was still going. Mariota came in early 3rd quarter in this game. He threw 4 passes. Yep. Think about that. In a game where they lost 31-0.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just wild stuff there. Now, and he threw an interception, so that's part of it there. But yeah, it was really bad. Jets Dolphins. This was just over in a second. Yep. Even before Taylor got hurt, it was like 14-0 already. They had the early turnover. Miami scored so easily. To me, this didn't change the Tua cold weather narrative. It just showed how ill-prepared the Jets were for this game.
No. Tua was not good in this game at all. He was 13 of 21 for 127 and a touchdown. And the Dolphins did kind of what they've done a few times throughout this run. They've won 4 in a row now, straight up. That Bills win, that looks great. There were a ton of fluky turnovers in that game, but I'm not going to take anything away from it. But 2 weeks in a row where they've like dominated early and then just pretty much done nothing the rest of the game. Like they're up 21-0 basically midway through the first quarter, and then really didn't move the ball again, didn't put up another touchdown until garbage time in the 4th quarter. Like they were just punting like crazy in the 2nd and 3rd quarters. Like the door was open for the Jets to get back in. They politely declined to do so. Right. The Jets opened this game 3-and-out, interception, 3-and-out, 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 interception, halftime, and then 2 more punts before finally getting a field goal in the 4th quarter. They did mix in a punt return touchdown in there, which was
for sure.
That was part of the handicap. That was part of the reason I kind of like the Jets in this game, is like every single week they make a big play on special teams. the offense was just so abhorrent in this game that it didn't matter. Brady Cook, by the way, ended up being the quarterback for the majority of this.
Yeah, and we'll see if he is this upcoming week. Another instant classic coming up, though. The Jets are 12.5, 13.5 point underdogs against your Jaguars this week.
12.5 was the number I saw last.
Yeah.
And it's tough to go against that. I mean, I don't think the Jags have been bigger than like a 6 or 6.5 point favorite all year. And I want to say that was
very uncomfortable, isn't it?
Yeah. It's like that might be a spot to just grab points with the Jets, and the Jags probably win, but could it be 27-17, something like that? A game that they dominate, but they don't necessarily pull away. I don't know. If it's Brady Cook against that Jags defense, that worries me.
Yeah. I'd be worried if Taylor were in there for that, at least to make it a game. But with Cook, I think it's going to be just a cruise control sort of game. So we'll see about that. That is going to wrap it up for us this week. We almost got it in under an hour, Nick, but we couldn't quite do it there. Had to empty the notebook on these lesser games. Yeah. Dare to dream. I doubt it, because we'll have a full slate of games.
Yeah, right.
No more buys, everybody. It's fantasy playoffs. Congrats if you did make the playoffs. Make sure to check out RotoWire's tools to help you win your league. Our start sit tool is, you can use it at any point in time. I posted the link in the chat forum there. My value meter will be up late tonight. We got Joe Bartle's free agent column, as well as he and Jake Latarski doing the free agent podcast yesterday. They'll update both. So make sure to tune in for all that sort of good stuff there. Thanks for listening to RotoWire. Good luck in week 15. We'll talk again soon.